Hello everyone, hope you all are doing well. I am excited that we are moving into kind of a different school of thought in our text and our review of all the counseling theories that are out there. So now we're in the humanistic school of thought, if you will, and talking about Carl Rogers and his daughter Natalie. I am excited to get to review all of your videos. So I do try to get all my grading done kind of typically on Fridays, but please know that I do try to provide a good amount of feedback for you on the videos that you submit. So I'm just going to kind of do them as they come in, ideally, if I can get to it next week, and provide you with the feedback that I can. Please see the rubric if you have any questions about what to expect on the feedback part of it, but it may not be that you get your graded video assignment back on Friday like most of the other assignments that I have or try to get done. So I am looking forward to those. I haven't looked over your journals yet, but I hope that you guys were able to all connect with your classmates or reconnect with your classmates, I should say, and the role plays went well. So I think that's all I had in terms of like housekeeping. And so with that, let's talk about Carl Rogers and person-centered therapy, okay? So main differences that we see in person-centered compared to what we've already talked about. We've covered psychoanalytic, we've talked about Adlerian psychotherapy, or Adlerian therapy and psychoanalytic theory. And so here with person-centered, we're seeing one of the biggest shifts, I think, in the world of counseling, the world of therapy, was when Carl Rogers presented person-centered. His person-centered approach to counseling, and that's for a number of reasons. Number one, because it was such a shift, such a big difference from what our approach to therapy was, both from the perspective of how we view a client and the perspective of what the therapist looks like, what the counselor looks like. So, you know, with the person-centered theory, we have a therapist or a counselor that is not the all-knowing entity. They are not the so-called expert of a client's life. There's an absence to a degree of techniques within person-centered therapy, which, especially if you're looking at that and comparing it to Adlerian approaches, Adlerian had like a two-page list of techniques that are used. And in person-centered therapy, we kind of have these, the three core tenets that promote growth within that counseling relationship. And so there is so much focus on the counselor-client relationship, the therapeutic relationship within person-centered therapy, that is different, I think, to a degree from Adlerian theory, to a greater degree from psychoanalytic theory, right? But here within person-centered, you know, it's the time where we see that there's a belief that clients are innately good. They have the ability to resolve their own issues, to forge their own path, to shift direction, and make the changes that they feel like they need to make when they feel like they want to make them. So the focus is on the problem. There's more of a focus on the here and now than, especially again with psychoanalytic theory, we weren't always looking at the here and now. So, you know, when I'm thinking about person-centered theory, I find and have found, continue to find, that novice counselors, new counselors, really gravitate towards person-centered theory. And I think the reason for that is because I don't, you know, whatever theoretical orientation you opt to adhere to later on, whichever one is pulling you in whatever direction, however you feel like you're going to be an integrated counselor, whatever your eventual work looks like, I don't care who you are, but the three core kind of areas of congruence, unconditional positive regard, and sorry, my dog is barking and distracting me. But having empathetic understanding for our clients, those three things are something that you find regardless of your theoretical orientation. And so I think for new counselors, there is a pull towards a person-centered theory because that's kind of that foundation of the micro skills that you guys got in 501, right? You know, a lot of the work that we did in 501 was focused on active listening, hearing our clients, understanding the stories that they were sharing with us, showing them that we were listening by offering reflective statements and accurate reflective statements and summarizations and paraphrasing, by checking in with our clients as we went along in the process and developing that relationship. And so that, I think, is why a lot of people, probably a lot of you, are really drawn to Carl Rogers and his approach. Now, one of the videos that you're going to watch is a really old video. I could not rightly call myself a counselor educator if I did not show you the Gloria tapes of the therapist working with poor client Gloria back in the 60s. So you'll get to see Carl Rogers in action. And so his approach to person-centered theory is so interesting and intriguing for me to watch, because it's not taking that type of direction and approach with a client is not something that feels as natural to me, although of course, obviously I would always try to be genuine with my clients and showing them empathy and rather than sympathy. But his approach and even his posture and the way that it is so non-directive was not ever something that I felt comfortable doing. But I love watching him because he's such a master at what he does. And so, yes, it's an old tape, and yes, she probably lights up like 20 cigarettes throughout the series of tapes. And I don't think people are really doing that anymore. But hopefully you find it interesting, and maybe it could be a review for you if you've already seen them. But I do encourage you to watch the whole thing just so you get an idea of what Carl Rogers in action actually looked like. Natalie Rogers, his daughter, took a different approach to person-centered theory with the expressive arts therapy. I put a short little video of her. She has since passed, since the textbook didn't update that. I don't really know why, because it's an up-to-date textbook, but that little nugget of information is missed. So she has passed away, but I provided a link to a website that provides more information about her and the work that she did in expressive arts therapy and around creative expression. And a lot of that we see and we'll talk about when we review contemplative therapy as well, like the meditation, and so there is some overlap, a lot of overlap, I think you'll find when you're reading about the other theoretical orientations between the different approaches that might be used and kind of the foundations of person-centered theory. Again, kind of looking at the chapter as a whole, there's a little section on motivational interviewing. I want you to read it, but we are going to come back to that later. So we are going to review motivational interviewing a bit more in depth, because I think motivational interviewing has really been gaining a lot of momentum in, I would say, the past decade. So we're going to put a little bit more focus on that later on. But there are a lot of these counseling theories and approaches that use those foundational elements of person-centered theory and build upon them. And then, of course, we see a bit of existentialism kind of running through the current of person-centered therapy as well. So other things that I think are important to mention. Sorry, I'm looking through my own little notes here. So really, in terms of, again, techniques that are used in person-centered theory, there a great deal of reflection. And the purpose of reflection and the way that the therapist or the counselor reflects statements to clients is, one, to check for accuracy. So there's always this kind of constant like feedback loop that's going on with person-centered theory. And in the text, one of the like post-counseling surveys was mentioned. I can't remember if he was working with Stan or Gwen or whatever her name was in the text, but so there's a lot of feedback. The counselor is always asking for that with person-centered theory. Am I getting that right? Am I understanding that right? Because really, you are, I'm a visual person, and so with person-centered theory, it's not that you're walking ahead of the client and the client's following you. It's not that you're directing the services that are provided. It's not that the client is walking like 10 steps ahead of you and you're running to catch up with them. You are like walking right there with the client in person-centered theory, and if they decide to veer off to the left, you're going to veer to the left with them. To a degree, but you're always following the direction of the client. And that works for some clients, and doesn't work for all clients. And that's one of those limitations in terms of diversity with person-centered theory. Although I personally think that there's more positives that go in on the side of considering diversity and social justice issues within person-centered theory, because of the need to be genuine with your clients and have that empathetic understanding and understand somebody's worldview within person-centered theory. But one of the limitations to it is that not all societies value that as we do here in kind of our traditional American society. Not all societies and cultures can say, you know, well, it's okay to focus on you as the individual and you direct what happens in your life, and you're the driver in the driver's seat at all times. So there is a bit of a limitation there. But again, I think positives outweigh the benefits with that. You know, the one thing I can also say with the kind of the congruence being genuine, right? Genuine with your clients, unconditional positive regard, and empathetic understanding is that within those three foundational elements of person-centered theory, if you are missing one of those, your client will be able to sniff it out in a heartbeat, and that really does have an impact on the development of trust and the development of the relationship. And so if your client does not feel that you are being genuine with them, if your client feels like you are being more sympathetic than empathetic, right? So we're not showing sympathy. We're not telling our clients that we feel sorry for them. You know, we are showing empathy. We are trying to understand their perspective, what they've lived through, what they're going through in that moment, and how their experiences have impacted them. That's empathy. It's a good amount of debate and some research on whether we can teach empathy in counselor education programs. You know, to a degree, can it be teachable? I would say yes. I think there has to be a desire to develop empathy. So if we do not present all of those three kind of characteristics as a counselor, or if we try to fake it, you know, clients do see through that, and you can feel it. It changes the dynamic of relationships. I feel like you can feel it in the air sometimes. Sometimes connections aren't made as naturally with clients, and that happens. You can have all of the unconditional positive regard towards a client that you could hope for, and sometimes connections just can't really be made. But you know, if you're trying to act as if you have empathy towards a client and you really genuinely don't, they're going to be able to see that, and it will impact the relationship. Carl Rogers did a great deal for research in counseling and therapy as well. Granted, this was a long time ago, and so, you know, we have modified how we look at research and validity and reliability, and you know, looking at covariates and different studies, and trying to be trying to be as robust as we can be when we're thinking about studying humans who you know, change direction all the time just because. But Carl Rogers really did do a good amount of work on the theory that he was developing, and I think that's a testament to person-centered theory as well, is that he was willing and actively reviewing the work that he was doing to see if what he was proposing was actually working for clients. And by and large, yes, from the studies that he conducted and the evidence that's out there, yeah, the relationship, focusing that highly and that intently on the relationship and the development of a relationship does show success in the client reaching their goals to be more independent, right? So again, not without some issues, but he and he made it a point to continue to study his work until the day he died. He was also just a humanitarian in general, and which is not surprising, I think, once you have watched the video of him, to know that it just seemed like he was a really good person, like a really good human being. So with that, I'm trying to think if there's another point to make, and just kind of reiterate that Corey did go over in the text around assessment and the use of person-centered theory today, right? So, you know, when we see kind of those adaptations of person-centered theory within like the expressive arts therapy, within motivational interviewing, what we see is really more of a shift towards using some techniques that can, and allowing a counselor and client to set a little bit more of a concrete goal, use some of those techniques, if you will, and see if a goal was achieved, because that's the way that more often than not we have to measure the work that we're doing. We have to account for the work that we're doing. We have to be able to say, this was the goal, this is how I worked to achieve it, and this was the end result, because we're typically reporting to somebody, right? So assessment, kind of at the core of person-centered theory, we wouldn't really be doing dedicated assessment, not like pencil and paper assessments that we might provide to clients on an ordinary basis, because the client is the best teller of their story. They're the best person to go to and ask questions. So it's more of like an auditory type assessment, if you will, with person-centered theory. But again, in this day and age, we use assessments frequently, regularly, and for a reason in counseling services that are provided. And so again, kind of thinking about how person-centered theory is used today versus in the 50s and 60s, it's about involving the client throughout the process. And again, I think that really puts another, check mark in the box of being a theoretical approach that does take into account diversity and social issues. Because if you fail to include your client in the assessment process, if you're not letting your client know why you're conducting an assessment, if you're not telling them what the assessment results mean, if you're not explaining it in terms of context, why would this help you to determine a treatment outcome, or why the heck are you even wasting the client's time by doing a 20-minute long assessment, or sending them out for some type of evaluation. But if you're not doing that, and you're not doing it in a culturally appropriate way, then really, again, using that assessment could potentially do harm to that developing relationship. So I think there a lot can be said about involving the client from start to finish when you're doing an assessment, regardless of what theoretical approach you're using. But if you're thinking about person-centered theory and using person-centered theory, or integrating aspects of it into the work that you do, that would be one area that I could see kind of in contemporary person-centered theory that you would have to really make a focus on, or put more of a focus on, involving the client throughout that part of the process. Another thing that I would say is that with person-centered theory, because such of the focus is on that relationship, and things tend to stick to us as counselors. And so we go through supervision to help with that, to combat the compassion fatigue, to combat the quote unquote burnout, because it can be difficult to leave work at work. And so if you haven't already started to establish routines that can provide you with that self-care component, I encourage you to do so, because, it's one thing to say that you have self-care down pat and you're good, and it's another to spend an 8-hour day listening to difficult client stories that are around trauma and different experiences that clients have had, and just walk out the door and not think about that later on at night. So with person-centered theory, I think that because there's such a focus and emphasis on creating and developing that bond with a client through the empathy that we show, through that unconditional positive regard, and through being genuine with our clients, that it does take a little bit more of that emotional effort on our part as a counselor to really connect in the ways that we should be if we're, adhering to the person-centered approach. And with that, kind of a side effect of that could be that we take on more from our client. And so, yes, I think getting supervision is important for so many reasons throughout somebody's professional career, but and especially for those of you that are looking at person-centered theory and saying, this really fits nicely for me as a new counselor, it's a nice stepping stone to where I see myself later on. Getting that supervision can be necessary, really, if you want to sustain a long career in counseling without doing harm to yourself and potentially doing harm to your clients. So with that, I will leave you guys to the rest of the module. I know there's a lot of stuff that's going on this week. Yes, there's a lot of different videos, some of them shorter, some of them longer. I hope you do find them useful. And you have the discussion post for the week, which is about the videos. So make sure to watch those first. And then, of course, your videos that will be due to me at the end of the module as well. So I hope you guys have a great week. I'm wearing my school colors, looks a little dressed down, but it's a football game weekend, so that's exciting for me because I'm a big Mountaineer football fan. So it'll be a little bit different this year, as is everything. So, but go Mountaineers in their football game, and I will see you all next week.